Aaron sat inside a small research station near the edge of the desert. The air was dry, and the faint hum of old machines filled the room. His eyes were fixed on the computer screen. For weeks he had been studying satellite data that most people ignored. The images showed nothing unusual to the trained eye, but Aaron noticed something strange. Beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx there were energy readings too regular to be natural. He rubbed his tired eyes and leaned closer to the screen. The signals repeated every few minutes like a heartbeat. The patterns were precise, almost like code. Aaron whispered to himself, "It cannot be just noise. Something is down there." For many years people had spoken about hidden chambers under the Sphinx. Most believed it was only legend. Scholars dismissed such tales, saying the Sphinx had been studied enough times to prove nothing was hidden. But Aaron felt different. He believed history often kept secrets. His heart beat faster as the patterns on the screen repeated once more. Mira entered the room carrying a notebook and a bottle of water. She was an engineer and had worked with Aaron on many projects before. She placed the bottle on his desk and looked at the screen. "Still chasing shadows?" she asked with a small smile. Aaron nodded. "Not shadows. Look at this. The readings are too exact. It's like something alive, waiting." Mira leaned closer. At first she frowned, but then her eyes widened. She could see the rhythm of the signals, steady and deliberate. She whispered, "It's responding to something. Maybe the ground sensors or maybe us." The thought sent a chill through the room. Aaron straightened and spoke firmly. "I think there is a hidden structure beneath the Sphinx. Something ancient. And I believe it wants to be found." Mira crossed her arms. "Many have searched before. Archaeologists, governments, even treasure hunters. None found anything. Why should it be different now?" Aaron's voice carried both determination and quiet wonder. "Because they looked with tools. I'm looking with patience. If the Sphinx holds a secret, it will not reveal itself to machines alone. It will reveal itself to those who are willing to listen." The station grew silent for a moment. Outside, the desert winds whispered against the windows. Mira studied her friend's face and saw the fire in his eyes. She knew that when Aaron believed in something, he never let go. With a small sigh, she nodded. "All right. If you are serious, then we must go there. But we need a plan." Aaron smiled for the first time that day. He opened a folder filled with sketches and maps. He had already traced the possible entry points between the paws of the Sphinx. Ancient writings hinted at sealed doors, and old drawings showed patterns carved into stone that no one had explained. That night, Aaron and Mira left the research station and drove toward the great monument. The desert stretched endlessly around them, the stars shining bright above. The Sphinx waited silent and timeless as it had for thousands of years. Its massive stone body lay half buried in sand, and its calm face looked east, as though guarding something beyond human understanding. When they arrived, the place was quiet. Tourists had gone, and only the desert night surrounded them. Mira carried her toolkit, and Aaron held a small scanner. They moved carefully, knowing that what they were attempting could not be explained to others easily. They stood between the paws of the Sphinx. The stone was cool to the touch, and the air felt heavier, as though the monument itself breathed. Aaron placed his palm against the stone surface, tracing the lines carved long ago. Mira scanned the wall, searching for any weakness. Suddenly the scanner flickered, and the signal grew stronger. The repeating pattern was no longer faint. It was clear and loud, pulsing like a drumbeat. Aaron's eyes widened. "It knows we are here." The stone under his hand trembled just for a second. A thin line of dust fell from a crack that had been invisible before. Mira stepped back, staring at the wall. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. "Yes," Aaron said softly. His voice shook with both fear and excitement. "The entrance is real. The Sphinx is guarding more than stone. Something waits beneath." They worked in silence for hours, marking the cracks, following the signal, and recording everything. Mira tapped the stone with her tools, and the sound echoed oddly as if the wall was hollow behind it. She turned to Aaron. "This is not ordinary construction. Whoever built this knew far more than we understand." The night deepened and the stars wheeled across the sky. The two explorers stood in the shadow of the Sphinx, feeling both small and honored. They had touched something untouched for ages. The energy still pulsed beneath their feet, guiding them. Aaron whispered as he looked up at the calm face of the monument. "This is only the beginning. Whatever lies beneath has waited for us, and we must be ready to follow." The desert gave no answer, but the pulse continued, steady and patient, like the heartbeat of a giant sleeping beneath the sand. The desert was quiet when Aaron and Mira returned the next evening. They carried only what they could hide in their packs: lights, ropes, scanners, and notebooks. The Sphinx towered above them, its paws resting like silent guardians over the sands. To anyone else, the monument looked unchanged, but Aaron and Mira now knew there was something waiting inside. The crack they had marked the night before was still visible. By daylight, it looked like a normal fracture in stone, but as the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the paws, faint lines of light shimmered along the crack, like veins glowing under skin. Mira touched the surface with her hand and the glow brightened. She stepped back quickly. "It reacts to us," she whispered. Aaron felt both awe and fear. He placed his hand beside hers. The light spread farther, forming shapes that looked like ancient symbols. They did not belong to any language he knew, yet the design seemed alive. He pressed harder and the stone gave way with a sound like a sigh. A section of the wall shifted inward, opening a narrow passage. Cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond, carrying a scent that was not of sand or dust but something older, like the air inside a sealed cavern untouched by time. Mira shone her light inside. The walls of the passage were smooth and curved, unlike the rough stone outside. It was as if another world waited beneath the paws. "Are we ready?" Mira asked, her voice low. Aaron nodded. "We came for this." They tied ropes to the outer stones and stepped into the narrow passage. Their lights revealed carvings on the walls. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, these symbols showed shapes of stars, strange machines, and figures standing under skies filled with moons. Mira traced her fingers across one design. "These are not from here," she said softly. The passage sloped downward. As they moved deeper, the air grew cooler, and the sound of their footsteps echoed strangely. Aaron felt the pulse from the night before growing stronger. It seemed to come from beneath their feet like a guide drawing them forward. After several minutes, they reached a chamber where the floor dropped sharply. The opening led into a vertical shaft that disappeared into darkness. A faint glow rose from below, pale and steady as though the earth itself glowed. Mira secured the rope and tested it twice. "We will climb carefully," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hand shook slightly as she tied the knots. Aaron went first, descending slowly into the shaft. The walls were lined with smooth panels that reflected the glow, and faint patterns shifted across the surfaces like water rippling under light. When he reached the bottom, he stepped onto solid ground. Mira followed, landing beside him. Together, they raised their lights. The chamber they entered was vast, far larger than the space inside the Sphinx should have allowed. The ceiling arched high above, carved into geometric patterns that shimmered faintly as though the stone itself remembered light. Pathways stretched in several directions, each marked by glowing lines on the floor. Aaron's voice broke the silence. "This is not just a tomb. It is something alive." Mira nodded slowly. "A labyrinth," she said. "One that reacts to us." They chose the central path, guided by the strongest glow. As they walked, the walls shifted in color, from pale silver to deep blue. Strange carvings showed figures holding orbs of light and pointing toward constellations. One mural showed the Sphinx itself, but with beams of light rising from its eyes toward the sky. Hours seemed to pass as they moved deeper, yet they felt no hunger or thirst. The air, though cool, seemed to give them strength. The pulse they had felt earlier now filled the corridor, steady like the beat of a hidden heart. Finally, they reached another chamber, this one circular. At the center stood a stone platform with steps leading upward. On the platform rested a sealed doorway covered in more glowing symbols. The doorway was not solid stone, but a shimmering barrier that looked like liquid light. Aaron approached slowly. "This is the entrance to the true labyrinth," he said. His voice trembled with wonder. Mira examined the barrier. "It does not respond to tools, only to touch, just like the wall above." Aaron placed his hand against the surface. The barrier rippled like water, but it did not let him pass. The symbols glowed brighter and rearranged themselves into a new pattern. Mira stepped closer and touched it as well. This time the barrier shivered and opened slightly, enough to reveal another passage beyond. They exchanged a glance. Mira spoke first. "It responds not to one but to both of us, cooperation." Aaron smiled faintly. Then this place was not meant for a single person. It was meant for those who walked together. They stepped through the barrier, and it closed silently behind them. The passage beyond was narrower and darker, the glow now faint. Yet Aaron felt no fear. The labyrinth had accepted them. As they continued deeper, the ground beneath their feet vibrated softly. It was not the vibration of machines, but something more natural, like the slow rhythm of breath. The labyrinth was alive, and it was watching them. Aaron stopped and looked back toward the sealed doorway now far behind them. "Mira," he said quietly, "whatever waits ahead, it has been waiting for us for longer than we can imagine." Mira tightened her grip on her light and gave a firm nod. "Then we must be ready to face it." The path stretched ahead, twisting into shadows and silence. With every step, the labyrinth grew more awake, and the explorers felt the weight of history pressing around them. The descent had only just begun. The narrow passage stretched before Aaron and Mira, winding like a serpent into the deep earth. Their footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the strange walls around them. The glow that had guided them so far flickered now, faint and uneven, as though the labyrinth itself was testing their resolve. Aaron paused to run his fingers along the surface of the wall. It felt warm, like skin warmed by the sun, though they were far beneath the ground. Patterns shifted faintly under his touch, moving as though alive. He whispered, "This place is not stone alone. It remembers us." Mira studied the corridor ahead. Her lamp revealed faint symbols etched into the walls, forming star maps she did not recognize. "It responds to us," she said. "Every step seems to change it. Look, the lines we passed before are already gone." Aaron turned back and his breath caught. The path behind them had shifted. Where once had been a long corridor now stood a blank wall, smooth and seamless. They were sealed inside. Mira pressed her hand against it, but it did not move. "We cannot go back," she said. Aaron's voice was steady, though his heart raced. "Then we must go forward. This place is alive, and it chooses the path for us." They continued on, guided by the dim glow ahead. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint hum that echoed through the stone. It was not mechanical, yet it pulsed like energy flowing through veins. Mira touched the ground and felt a vibration under her palm. "It is awake," she said. As they moved deeper, the corridor opened into a chamber unlike any they had seen. The walls curved high above them, glowing faintly like starlight. In the center stood a tall structure shaped like a pillar of glass, though it pulsed with liquid light. Around it, the floor shifted, pieces of stone sliding silently to form new paths. Mira gasped softly. "The labyrinth is moving." Aaron stepped closer to the glowing pillar. He raised his hand but did not touch it. The light inside the pillar swirled and shifted, forming shapes that looked like constellations. Slowly, the lights arranged into a map of stars, but then they scattered again as if waiting for recognition. "It is showing us the sky," Aaron whispered, "but not the sky we know." The floor beneath them trembled and new passages opened. The chamber changed shape, walls sliding with a sound like deep breath. The labyrinth was alive, responding to their presence. Suddenly, part of the floor dropped away, revealing a deep pit. Mira stepped back quickly, pulling Aaron with her. From the pit rose a low hum, and beams of pale light shot upward, forming patterns in the air. The patterns moved like puzzles, shifting into different arrangements. Some resembled doors, others keys, yet none were complete. Mira frowned. "It is testing us. The labyrinth wants us to choose." Aaron studied the moving lights. He noticed that when Mira moved closer, the patterns shifted again, changing shape to reflect her presence. Together they stepped toward the pit, and the lights merged into a single path that pointed to a new opening in the wall. Aaron's heart raced. It responds to us not alone, but together. The labyrinth demands unity. They followed the new path, stepping carefully as the ground shifted under their feet. The walls around them glowed with brighter light now, as though the labyrinth was pleased with their choice. The passage ahead narrowed, and they squeezed through until they entered another chamber. This one was smaller but more intricate. Machines lined the walls, though they were unlike anything human eyes had seen. They were not made of gears or wires, but of flowing shapes that seemed half stone, half light. The machines moved slowly, adjusting themselves but made no sound. Mira touched one carefully, and it pulsed with gentle light, as though acknowledging her. She turned to Aaron. "They are watching us, not to harm us, but to see if we can continue." Aaron nodded. Guardians without words. Suddenly the machines shifted and the walls began to move again. The floor split into 3 paths, each glowing faintly. The left glowed with silver light, the right with deep blue, and the center with pale gold. Mira frowned. A choice. Aaron closed his eyes, listening to the faint hum in the air. The pulse beneath his feet seemed stronger toward the center. He opened his eyes and pointed. The middle path. It is where the heartbeat leads. Mira trusted his instinct. They stepped onto the golden path, and as they did, the other two paths sealed instantly, vanishing into smooth walls. The labyrinth had chosen for them as much as they had chosen for it. The golden path led downward in a spiral, the air growing colder and heavier. Their lamps flickered, but the walls themselves began to glow brighter, lighting the way. Strange carvings appeared again, showing figures reaching upward toward stars as if striving for something greater. At the bottom of the spiral, they entered another wide chamber. This time no machines lined the walls. Instead, the floor was covered in symbols that glowed faintly beneath their feet, forming shifting patterns with every step. Aaron crouched down and touched one of the glowing lines. The entire chamber responded, the patterns shifting faster, forming images of ships moving between stars. Mira stood in silence, awe filling her eyes. "This is no tomb," she said softly. "It is a memory. A living memory." The chamber trembled, and the patterns changed again, forming new paths that stretched outward. The labyrinth was alive, testing, guiding, remembering. Aaron stood tall, his eyes fixed on the glowing paths. The labyrinth has awakened fully. It knows we are here, and now it will decide if we are worthy to continue. The hum around them deepened, and the walls seemed to breathe. The labyrinth was no longer silent stone. It was awake, alive, and watching them closely. The chamber glowed with shifting lines beneath Aaron and Mira's feet. The walls pulsed gently as if alive, and the air was filled with a quiet hum. The explorers stood still, waiting, listening. Then, without warning, the glow across the chamber changed. Shapes began to rise from the walls and floor, forming tall figures made of light and metal. Aaron stepped back, his breath caught in his throat. Mira raised her light, but it was not needed. The figures glowed softly, their surfaces smooth like polished mirrors. They had no faces, no weapons, and yet their presence filled the chamber with weight. "Guardians," Mira whispered. The figures moved without sound, gliding across the floor. They did not attack, but they formed a circle around the explorers, watching. Their stillness was unsettling, yet there was no sense of threat, only judgment, as if the Guardians were waiting for something. Aaron's instinct told him to remain calm. He lowered his hands to show he carried no weapon. Mira followed his lead, placing her tools back in her pack. The Guardians responded immediately. The glow across their bodies softened as though acknowledging peace. Aaron spoke softly, almost to himself. "They do not want to fight. They want to see how we act." The Guardians moved again, parting slowly to open a path through the chamber. The glowing floor lit the way forward. Mira exchanged a glance with Aaron and whispered, "They are guiding us." Together they stepped onto the path. The Guardians followed silently, their movements graceful and precise. It was as though the labyrinth had placed them under watch. The new passage opened into a long hall. Its walls were lined with carvings, but these were different from before. Instead of stars or ships, the carvings showed human figures, men and women walking side by side, lifting each other from darkness, reaching upward together. Mira touched one carving and murmured, "This place measures cooperation, not strength." As they walked, the Guardians mirrored their steps. When Aaron slowed, they slowed. When Mira paused to study the walls, they stopped as well, waiting with endless patience. The silence was deep, yet it was not empty. It carried meaning, as though the Guardian's presence alone was a language. Halfway down the hall, the ground trembled. The path split into two, one to the left and one to the right. The Guardians divided, half standing by the left path and half by the right. Mira studied the carvings again. On the left wall, the figures worked alone, carrying heavy loads by themselves. On the right, the carvings showed people joining hands to move forward together. She stepped toward the right. "This is the answer. Not alone, but together." Aaron nodded and joined her. As they stepped onto the right path, the Guardians near the left faded into the walls, their light dimming until they vanished. The Guardians near the right, however, glowed brighter and followed them forward. The passage led them into another chamber, smaller but more intense in its glow. At its center was a wide platform raised above the floor. Symbols covered its surface, shifting slowly like moving sand. The Guardians spread out around the room, standing in silence. Mira studied the platform. It is another test. Aaron stepped onto the platform and the symbols lit up under his feet. They formed shapes of bridges, but each bridge was incomplete, missing sections. Mira stepped beside him and new parts of the bridges formed, filling the gaps. The meaning was clear. Alone, the bridges were broken. Together, they were whole. Mira smiled faintly. It is watching how we trust each other. The platform shuddered and the bridges became real, extending outward into the chamber. Narrow stone paths stretched into the darkness. The guardians did not move, but their glowing bodies turned toward the bridges. Aaron and Mira stepped carefully onto one of the bridges. It swayed under their weight, but it held firm. Halfway across, sections of the bridge began to crumble away. Mira stumbled, but Aaron caught her hand quickly. The bridge steadied at once, as if responding to their trust. They crossed together step by step until they reached the far side. The moment their feet touched solid ground, the crumbling stopped, and the bridge reformed behind them. The guardians bowed their heads, their glowing forms dimming in silent approval. A doorway opened at the end of the chamber, glowing with golden light. Aaron turned to the guardians. They are not here to stop us. They are here to measure us, Mira nodded. Not power, not knowledge, but trust, courage, and unity. These are the keys. The guardians remained behind as the explorers stepped through the doorway. The golden light faded into another passage, one that sloped downward into greater depth. The hum of the labyrinth grew louder, like the steady beat of a drum. As they walked, Aaron whispered, "If these are only the guardians at the edge, what waits deeper inside?" Mira's eyes shone with determination. Whatever it is, it believes humanity can face it. That is why it watches us. The passage narrowed again, the walls glowing faintly as though alive. The silence of the guardians still lingered in their minds. It was a silence filled not with fear, but with expectation. They pressed forward, deeper into the unknown, their steps guided by the knowledge that the labyrinth was testing not their strength of body, but their strength of spirit. The guardians had spoken without words, and their silent message was clear. Only those who walked together could pass through the labyrinth's heart. The passage stretched deeper into the earth, glowing faintly as Aaron and Mira walked side by side. Their breaths echoed softly, mixing with the steady hum of the labyrinth. Every step felt heavier, not because of their bodies, but because of the weight of silence pressing around them. The guardians had tested their trust, and now something greater waited ahead. The passage ended in front of a tall archway. Symbols of light shimmered across it, moving slowly like drifting water. Aaron lifted his lamp, but the arch needed no extra light. It glowed on its own, alive and watchful. Mira touched the surface, and the arch rippled open. They stepped through and entered a vast chamber unlike anything they had seen before. The walls curved high above, their surfaces covered in shining crystal. The moment they entered, the crystals lit up, filling the chamber with soft white light. Then, without warning, voices filled the air. At first, the voices were faint, like whispers carried by the wind, but slowly they grew clearer. Aaron froze, his eyes wide. The voices were speaking in languages from every age of humanity, ancient tongues, forgotten dialects, and even modern speech. They overlapped, forming a wave of sound that filled every corner of the chamber. Mira turned slowly, her mouth slightly open. "They are echoes," she whispered. "Echoes of humanity." The walls shimmered again, and images appeared within the crystals. Aaron and Mira saw people building fires in the dark, carving tools from stone and painting on cave walls. The vision shifted to great ships sailing across oceans, explorers setting foot on new lands, and people working together to raise cities from dust. Aaron's chest tightened. "It is showing us our history." The voices shifted again, becoming louder. They heard the sound of human laughter, of songs, of children calling out. Then came cries of struggle, wars, and storms. Yet even in those darker sounds, the vision showed people lifting each other up, rebuilding, striving forward. Mira stepped closer to one of the walls, watching the scenes change. Her eyes reflected the light. This labyrinth is not only ancient technology, it is a memory. It has kept the story of humanity safe inside it. Aaron shook his head slowly. But how? Who placed this here? The chamber answered not with words, but with new images. The crystals now showed figures that were not human. They were tall, with long limbs and glowing eyes, standing beneath alien skies. They built great cities of stone and light. And above them hung constellations not seen from Earth. The figures placed something in the ground. Machines, crystals, symbols, and the vision shifted back to the Sphinx, its paws resting gently above the hidden structure. Mira whispered, "It was not only humans. Another race left this behind, but they left it for us." The voices in the chamber grew softer again, merging into a single steady tone. Aaron placed his hand against one of the glowing crystals. It responded, showing him images of stars beyond Earth, stars arranged into maps. He saw worlds turning in distant skies, their surfaces shining with oceans, mountains, and strange landscapes. Mira touched a crystal near him, and her vision joined his. Together they saw humans standing on those distant worlds, looking up at alien skies just as their ancestors had once looked at the first fire. "They believed we would reach for the stars," Mira said. "They built this labyrinth to remind us of who we are and who we could be." The chamber trembled softly. The voices faded, replaced by silence once more. Yet the silence was not empty. It was expectant, as though the labyrinth had given them a gift and now waited to see what they would do with it. Aaron stepped back from the wall, his heart racing. "This is not a tomb. It is a message to humanity." Mira turned to him, her face set with quiet strength. "But why here? Why under the Sphinx?" Aaron looked up at the glowing ceiling. "Because the Sphinx has always been a guardian. It was built to watch, to protect. Maybe those who placed the labyrinth chose it because humanity itself would one day build something above it, never knowing what lay beneath." For a moment they both stood in silence, letting the chamber's light wash over them. They felt the weight of countless generations pressing on their shoulders. Humanity's struggles, its triumphs, its endless journey, it was all here preserved in crystal. Then the floor of the chamber shifted. The glowing crystals dimmed and a new path opened in the far wall. This time no guardians appeared. The labyrinth itself had given its approval. Aaron whispered, "It has shown us our past. Now it wants to test if we are ready for the future." Mira's eyes shone with determination. "Then we go forward. For them and for us." They walked toward the opening. The chamber of echoes remained behind, its voices fading into silence. Yet the memory of those voices of laughter, struggle, and hope stayed within their hearts. As they entered the new passage, the hum of the labyrinth grew stronger, deeper. The air felt heavier, charged with unseen energy. They both knew the next test would not simply show them history. It would demand something greater, the strength to carry that history into what came next. The Chamber of Echoes had given them the truth. The path ahead would ask if they were ready to live it. The new passage stretched long and narrow, its walls glowing faintly with golden lines. The air felt heavier here, filled with a strange pressure that made every breath slow and deep. Aaron and Mira moved carefully, their lamps trembling in their hands, though the walls already gave light. Neither spoke for a time. The silence of the labyrinth was louder than words. At last, the path ended in front of a tall doorway shaped like an arch of stone and light. Unlike the passages before, this doorway did not open when they touched it. Instead, strange symbols appeared across its surface, shifting like a puzzle. The ground beneath their feet shook, and the doorway spoke without voice through vibration and light. Mira placed her hand against the surface. The symbols glowed brighter, but the doorway remained closed. "It wants something more," she said softly. Aaron nodded. "The Guardians tested our trust. The Chamber of Echoes showed us our history. This must be the final trial." The doorway opened slowly, revealing a wide hall beyond. The walls glowed brighter than before, and the air inside shimmered with energy. They stepped through together, and the doorway closed firmly behind them. Aaron frowned. "It wants us to choose." The hall stretched farther than they could see, lined with tall pillars. At its center, bridges crossed over a deep chasm. The bridges were narrow, made of stone slabs floating in the air with gaps between them. Below the chasm was only endless darkness. Mira's eyes narrowed. "We must cross," Aaron nodded. He stepped onto the first slab, and it shifted slightly under his weight. Mira followed close behind. The slab stretched forward in a broken line, forcing them to leap across gaps. At first, the jumps were small, but as they moved farther, the gaps widened and the slabs grew unstable. Halfway across, the labyrinth shifted again. The slabs behind them crumbled into dust, leaving no way back. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones. The labyrinth was alive, and it was watching. Mira's foot slipped on one slab, and she wavered dangerously over the chasm. Aaron reached out and caught her arm, pulling her steady. The slab stopped shaking at once as though the labyrinth approved of his choice. "It reacts to us," Mira said, her breath quick. "Yes," Aaron answered. "It is testing if we give up or if we keep going." The gaps grew wider. One leap seemed impossible. The slab they stood on trembled, threatening to collapse. Aaron looked at Mira, his face pale but determined. "We cannot stop. We must trust ourselves." Together they ran and leapt across the gap. For a moment they hung in the air, their hearts pounding, before landing hard on the next slab. It shuddered under their weight, then steadied. The hum in the air softened, as if the labyrinth acknowledged their courage. At last they reached the far side. The slabs behind them dissolved into dust, falling silently into the endless dark. Only the path forward remained. They entered a new chamber, this one circular and vast. The walls glowed with shifting light, showing visions of stars and distant worlds. At the center of the chamber stood a great pedestal shaped like a stone heart. Symbols pulsed across its surface, steady and strong. Aaron approached slowly. He felt the hum of the labyrinth strongest here, as though the entire structure's heartbeat came from this pedestal. Mira stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the glowing symbols. "This is the heart of the labyrinth," she said. Aaron reached toward it, but before his hand touched the surface, the chamber shifted. The walls darkened and illusions formed around them. Suddenly the chamber was gone, replaced by a storm of images. They saw themselves standing on the desert surface, lost and defeated. They saw the Sphinx crumbling into sand, the labyrinth collapsing into ruin. Aaron gasped. "It is showing us failure." The visions changed. They saw themselves trapped in endless tunnels, separated, calling for each other but never meeting again. Mira gritted her teeth. "These are not truths. They are tests. The labyrinth wants to break our spirit." The illusions grew sharper, louder. The sound of stone falling, the cries of despair, the weight of hopelessness pressed around them. Mira fell to her knees, clutching her head. Aaron knelt beside her, gripping her hand firmly. "Look at me," he said. "This is not real. We will not break. We came together and we will finish together." His voice cut through the storm of illusions. Mira lifted her eyes to his, steadying her breath. Together they stood, holding hands against the flood of fear. The illusions wavered. The storm began to fade. The walls of the chamber glowed again, brighter than before. The pedestal pulsed strongly, as though the labyrinth itself acknowledged their resolve. Aaron stepped forward once more. He placed both hands on the pedestal, and Mira did the same. The heartbeat of the labyrinth surged through them, deep and powerful. The symbols across the pedestal rearranged, forming a map of stars glowing with brilliant light. Mira whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "It is showing us the way forward beyond Earth." Aaron's heart raced. This is what it wanted us to see. Not treasure, not power, but destiny. The chamber trembled, but not with threat. The walls opened slowly, revealing another passage filled with golden light. The labyrinth had tested their resolve, and they had endured. Aaron turned to Mira. "The trial is over. The labyrinth believes in us." Mira smiled faintly, her eyes shining with both exhaustion and hope. "Then we must believe in ourselves." Together, they stepped into the glowing passage, ready for the final truth that waited beyond. The golden passage carried Aaron and Mira forward like a river of light. Their footsteps echoed softly, yet the walls glowed brighter with every step, as if guiding them to a place that had waited for ages. The air felt lighter now, no longer heavy with trials but filled with calm. Both explorers sensed they were close to the heart of the labyrinth's purpose. At the end of the passage, a grand chamber opened before them. Its ceiling was so high it seemed to vanish into the sky itself. The walls curved outward in a circle, shimmering like the surface of water. At the very center stood a great platform shaped like a star with 7 points glowing softly. Above it floated a vast sphere of light, turning slowly like a miniature sun. Aaron and Mira walked onto the star platform. The moment they set foot on it, the sphere shifted and countless beams of light spread across the chamber. The walls transformed into a great map of the heavens. Stars appeared in every direction, not only the constellations they knew, but thousands more, arranged into patterns beyond human knowledge. Mira's voice trembled with awe. "This is not just Earth's sky. These are other systems, other worlds." Aaron stared upward. He recognized some constellations, but also saw paths of light connecting them, forming routes across the galaxy. The sphere above them pulsed gently, as though it were alive, aware of their presence. The chamber spoke not with words but with harmony. The light vibrated softly and meaning filled their minds. They understood without sound, as if the labyrinth shared knowledge directly with their hearts. It told them that long ago an ancient starfaring people came to Earth. They had seen something unique in humanity. Unlike other species, humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced. But they carried a spirit of endurance, the ability to rise even when the odds were impossible. Aaron's chest tightened as he listened. They believed in us, Mira nodded slowly. They built this labyrinth waiting for the day humans would be ready. This was not a tomb or a prison. It was a message, a gift. The walls continued to glow, showing visions. They saw images of tall beings made of light and shadow working beside early humans. These beings passed knowledge in simple ways, not by tools but by guiding thought. They left the labyrinth hidden beneath the Sphinx, knowing time would bury it but also preserve it. They trusted that one day humans would find it, not through force but through patience and courage. The visions faded, leaving only the star map shining brightly. Aaron and Mira stepped closer to the center of the platform. The sphere above them grew brighter, sending a single beam of light downward. It touched the floor between them, forming a smaller, glowing object, a disk made of crystal and metal, no larger than Aaron's hand. Mira picked it up carefully. The object was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. Symbols moved across its surface, rearranging into familiar shapes. She realized it was a key, a guide to the star map they had just seen. "This will show us where to go," Mira whispered. Aaron's eyes burned with determination. "Not just us, humanity. This is meant for everyone." The chamber grew quiet again. The sphere dimmed until it became no more than a soft glow like a lantern. The walls returned to smooth stone. The map of stars vanished, leaving only memory and the small disk in Mira's hands. They knew the labyrinth had given them everything it could. Its purpose was complete. A new doorway opened on the far side of the chamber, leading upward. The air beyond smelled fresh, carrying the faint scent of sand and desert wind. Aaron and Mira walked toward it, climbing slowly. After all the darkness and shifting halls, the light of the desert sun felt like a promise waiting for them. When they emerged from the passage, they stood again between the paws of the Sphinx. The evening sun hung low, painting the sky orange and gold. To any passerby, nothing seemed different. The desert was still. The Sphinx still watched over the land as it had for thousands of years. Yet Aaron and Mira knew the truth. They carried more than discovery. They carried destiny. Aaron looked at the great stone face above them. This monument was not only for the past, it was for the future. Mira held the glowing disk close, feeling its warmth. "And now it belongs to us, to humanity." They stood silently for a while, letting the desert wind brush against their faces. Both felt the weight of the labyrinth's legacy, but neither felt fear. Instead, there was hope, bright and steady. For centuries, humans had looked at the stars with wonder. Now they had been given a sign that the stars were not only distant lights but paths waiting to be walked. The labyrinth beneath the Sphinx had tested them, not to keep them away but to prove they were ready. Mira smiled faintly. "The stars are calling," Aaron returned her smile. "And we will answer." Together they turned away from the ancient monument. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but beyond the horizon lay something greater. Beyond Earth, beyond the skies, waited worlds yet to be seen. The labyrinth had kept its secret for thousands of years. Now its message would live on in the hearts of those who dared to dream. Humanity's journey was only beginning, and the stars would no longer be silent.